Well, good morning. Good to see everybody. Hope you had a good time already this morning. Some of you guys are already involved in various family activities and so forth, and it's great. Thank you for making the time to come here and being a part of our worship this morning and being here. So we're praying for many family members who are probably on the road and they're trying to get here. And some of you have already had Christmas. I've talked to you guys, and you've already had that, so you're done and sitting back and enjoying it. That's the nature of the season, but it's good to have you guys here. We've been talking on Sunday mornings just about self-denial and working through that. So I thought through the Christmas story and not wanting to, but ending up having the same theme in some sense with regard to that. Take your Bibles and join me in Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, I kind of want to focus on really one verse and then go from there. So Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who was born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.' And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." Interesting, right? That this great news of Christmas troubled Herod. I remember years ago as a kid, we had Christmas. I took all my stuff down. I don't know what I was, probably late grade school maybe. And it laid all the stuff out on my bed, and it covered the bed. Everything I got for Christmas just covered the complete bed. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm disappointed. I had a whole bed full of presents, and I don't know, it wasn't disappointed in any one gift. I wasn't disappointed that I didn't get any one gift. There was just this, that was it. That we built up for all this, and, of course I got the obligatory grandma underwear and socks, and stuff like that, but everything else I had, whether it was candy or things, I would just remember being very disappointed. And sometimes Christmas can be that way. Maybe some of you are disappointed maybe with a gift or something like that. Or maybe you're disappointed in a bonus that you kind of thought was going to be the end of the year. And maybe some of you are disappointed in your family. I hope not, but that's a reality. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes some of you here might be disappointed in your loneliness. Expectations sometimes that Christmas will be the salve that cures everything and we'll just be happy no matter what. It'll bring joy in the midst of our lives, and sometimes it doesn't bring that joy. Maybe sometimes our expectations are too high for various reasons. Maybe our lives are kind of tough. We're hoping something will pull us out of that. I think sometimes we're disappointed in Christmas, the time of season. Quite simply, we forget what Christmas is all about. And that is that God loved us and gave us his son. And there's no disappointment in that. There's no disappointment in that. And for this reason, I think many people miss Christmas because they have all these other expectations rather than just sitting around realizing God gave his son. Some people are just in the dark. They don't realize God, and they don't understand his son. They miss Christmas because they don't know anything about Jesus. They don't know about their own sin. They don't understand their salvation. My concern is that you and I make sure that we kind of focus on who Christ is and the gift of God to you and I, and we don't miss Christmas. We know that. We're all here. It's Sunday morning, and there'll be a service in the evening, and my guess is many of you will come back because you're truly saved. It's twice, not just twice a year. You're twice on Christmas, right? But sometimes we just kind of inject ourselves into this season a little bit more than we should. We need to remain true worshipers of Jesus during Christmas. I'll talk to you about a guy who missed Christmas, and then I want to talk about you and I helping us not miss Christmas. The first example is of Herod the king. Verse 3, Herod the king heard this, and he was troubled. The very first Christmas, Herod was troubled. It's an example of self. What do we know about Herod the Great? Bear with me as I give you a little bit of a history lesson. He was troubled. He was literally, the idea of the word of troubled in my translation is frightened. He was terrified. He was agitated. Why? Well, Herod had not received the title King of the Jews directly from Rome. He held it, and he was there. Herod, after all, was called Herod the Great. That's not a bad title. Herod the mediocre, Herod the okay. You know, they don't do that. Herod the Great. So let's look at some history, and bear with me. I'm going to run through a bunch of history. In 198 BC, Palestine became subject to Syria from the north. And Syria was not in great standing with Rome and needed to pay for its indiscretions. And so as a result of that, they imposed a heavy tax upon the Jewish people. And the Jews are no different than anybody else. Everybody hates taxes. And so in 175 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes became king over the Palestinian area from Syria, and the conditions worsened. Antiochus goes on to lead a campaign against Egypt, and the false news of his death in that battle reached the Jews, and it caused this great rejoicing throughout the land of Israel. All the Jews are celebrating Antiochus' death. However, Antiochus was very much alive. And he returned to Palestine, and he massacred thousands of Jews for their rejoicing and sold many into slavery. 168 BC, another failed attempt to take Egypt, so Antiochus again returned to Israel and again took it out on the Jews. This time, waiting for the Sabbath, he entered Jerusalem. He's killing the Jews, and he worked to wipe out the Jewish religion altogether, and he began to offer pigs on the altar in the temple built by Zerubbabel. The Jewish people cry out to Jehovah, and an answer is seen. An old priest was asked to help in the pagan sacrifices of pigs on the altar, and Matthias, the priest, refused to slay the pigs. Instead, he slayed the commissioner of Antiochus as well as the apostate Jew who was with him. Matthias' son Judas then took over the battle after Matthias' death and led a rebellion. 165 BC, the temple was cleansed and rededicated to Jehovah, and this rededication is called the Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah. That's what they celebrate. They celebrate the rededication of the Zerubbabel's temple after the massacre and the desecration of that temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. Sons of Matthias ruled until 135 BC, and they were followed by the Maccabean rulers, who were more Hellenistic, meaning that they were emphasizing the secular over the spiritual affairs. The Maccabeans conquered the Samaritans, and he tore down their temple in Gerizim. Remember, the Samaritan woman said, "Which mountain do we worship on, Gerizim or the one in Jerusalem?" And he tore down their temple. He also conquered Edom to the south. The Jewish rulers shed much blood. The Maccabeans was a bloody rule. They shed much blood both in Edom and in Samaria. And Edom was governed by Alexander, who was the son of Antipas. Now, Antipas, there's no test. You're just, this is the best history class ever, right? All you have to do is listen, okay? Antipas was the son of Antipater, whose son is Herod. So we could go this way. Alexander begot Antipas, Antipas begot Antipater, and Antipater, that guy begat Herod. Upon Alexander's death, there was a two-way struggle broke out, and ultimately Rome brought Rome to Palestine in 63 BC. Pompey invades Judea and captures Jerusalem. In 46 BC, the Jews could not agree on a governor, so the Edomite Antipater was named procurator of Judea. In 40, Herod flees to Rome to escape the Parthians who invade. Rome Senate names Herod then king of the Jews. 37 BC, Augustus increases Herod's territory to all of Palestine, and so Herod now is there. Everything from Jordan to Syria, Lebanon, and Edom is now under Herod's rule. And Herod, by race, is an Edomite. He was quite capable, he was quite cruel, and he was quite crafty. He destroyed insurgencies, he kept peace, he collected taxes, and that made Rome very happy with Herod. He built Jerusalem. He built a theater there. He built a hippodrome there. He built the temple in 19 BC. He builds a palace there. He builds a Caesarean port city. He builds Masada, the south fortress, and he builds the Herodium. He is a great builder, which, if you kind of go through history, a lot of the big kings and the great kings were big builders, and of which Herod followed that. He was political. And during a drought of 20 BC, give or take, he makes peace with Egypt and he feeds his people. And he cuts off the legs of the furniture to pay Patronus of Egypt. He does whatever he needs to do, but he feeds his people. He was a jealous man. Hasmonean, the descendants of the Maccabees were a threat to him and his throne, so he takes care of them ruthlessly. He had 10 wives. The first wife was Merimene. She was a Hasmonean, hoping to marry her would help with standing with the Jews. It did not, but he continued. Herod, because of his first wife and her mother Alexandra, he appoints Aristobul as high priest. The people love him. Herod gets jealous of the high priest, so he plots secretly to kill the high priest. They drown him in the Jordan, or he drowns in Jordan while he was supposedly innocently taking a swim. That was Herod's hand. And as a result of killing the high priest and the people loving him, he provides the man who he killed a phenomenal and magnificent funeral. Again, that goes to his craftiness. But because Herod loved power, he was equally suspicious. He killed people who were his rivals, and he did it ugly. There is quite a list of uncles and cousins and sons that he killed. In fact, 5 days before Herod died, he killed his son who was to succeed him. So jealous and so crazy, insane, suspicious he was. So, when the Magi show up in Matthew chapter 2 and says, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" Herod's head explodes. He has been killing people his entire life so that he can maintain being King of the Jews. And now some people come to find out where the new King of the Jews is born. Crazy. He was terrified. He was agitated. Why? Because of self. All because of self. Because Herod was concerned with himself, he was going to miss the chance to worship and glory in the gift of God to the world. People who miss Christmas because of themselves. So much of Christmas many times is giving so that we can in turn receive. Right? As I stood in my bedroom as a young boy, looking at all the amazing gifts I had been given to me, I stood there in disappointment because I was wrapped up in myself and I was concerned about Christmas meaning more to me than it did because it was gone through the idea of self. Now, it's a young boy, and there's a situation there where the younger you are, the more you don't understand. But I do remember just standing there feeling Christmas. Sometimes our family comes and we have a big thing and we put tons of work into it and all this stuff is put in and they leave and it's just like, I spent weeks getting ready for this 4 hours and they left and there's a sense of emptiness because we hoped we would get something more out of that than came. Maybe we hope for more appreciation for the thoughtfulness that we put into a gift or the work that we put into just the right food, or maybe somebody came and said something inappropriate or not as sensitive as it could have been, and everybody was on edge as a result of that. All those things can happen, and Christmas has a lot of drama that has a lot of self wrapped into it, and so sometimes Christmas can be disappointing. Why? Because we didn't just sit around and focus on the fact that God gave His Son, Jesus Christ. and that Jesus left his heavenly throne to come and be the babe in the manger. How do we make Christmas great? Well, I think we make Christmas great by trying to deny ourselves and follow him. We do it by the extermination of self. Put your name there and just exterminate yourself. How do I not miss Christmas? How do I not be disappointed by the events? How do I not be Herod? Right? Well, don't be Herod by killing your sons. That'd be a good start, right? But beyond that, obviously, we do that by not being caught up in ourselves. And self is always the 800-pound gorilla in the heart. Self is always the 800-pound gorilla in the heart. Paul says it this way, and famously to the Philippians, he says, count them as rubbish. Count all the things that you have as rubbish so that you may gain Christ and be found in him, not having any righteousness on my own. Paul goes through, and now think about what he counted as rubbish. Well, he's born in the right tribe. He had no control over that. He was circumcised on the right day. He had no control over all of that. But everything he had done through his education and life to achieve and become a man of status, he was in the higher echelons of Phariseeism, which was in the higher echelons of the ruling class. He had achieved all this: world standing, national standing, high respect. He was zealous for his worship of Jehovah Yahweh. And he said, all of that was bound up in me. So all of that was bound up in the wrong reason, and I counted as rubbish. The only thing I count worth anything to me is that I gain Christ. So first of all, why self is so hard to deny? Why? Because it's natural to trust in works. Trusting in works is a natural thing. The Lord commanded the man, saying, any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you may not eat, for the day you eat of it you shall die. If you eat of the tree, you'll die. That's a work, right? So don't do this and do this. That's the natural thing. It's natural. They imagined, right, that they could work without Christ. In John 6, it says, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? That's a natural question. What do I need to do? What is expected? How do I work my way there? Philippians 3:4, although I might have confidence in the flesh, if anyone else has a mind to put confidence in the flesh, I far more. We do things. How do I know you're saved? Well, we start listing the things we do rather than the things we believe. That's the easy place for us to go. How do I know you're Christian? I go to church. You know what? I love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentle. We don't go necessarily to the character traits. We rather go to the things we do. It's a natural thing to look at that. Trusting in works is natural. The second thing that's hard to get rid of self is being comforted by self is natural. When we are confronted by sin, we tend to comfort ourselves by ourself. We don't comfort ourselves by saying, you know what, when somebody comes and said, Rick, you're in sin here. My comfort often in my response is, you know what, I didn't mean it that way. Or rather than saying, my comfort being, you know what, you're right, I'm a sinner, I need to confess that, and Christ forgives me. Christ's forgiveness is my comfort in sin. Rather, I'm not that bad. I know it looks bad, but my heart was in the right place. I know I said that, but here's the context to make it not sound so bad as it was. We tend to want to make myself not so bad and explain myself rather than just say, you know what, you're right, that was a sin. And my only comfort is that Christ died for that sin and forgives me, and so I can only ask you in my sin to forgive me for my sin as well. That's all I've got. Please forgive me. Please forgive me is a hard thing for us to say. We rather want to make ourselves not look so bad by explanation. Thomas Manton says, usually when conviction is not very deep, Men blind and choke conscience with their own endeavors and the resolution of growing better. When they are wounded with sin, they are apt to run to self for plaster. You know, yesterday I went to Home Depot and I bought a bunch of spackle, and I've got to walk around my house with a knife and plaster the walls with all the chinks in it, right? That's kind of how we do our life. Rather than just say, God, forgive me, we come to ourselves and we try to plaster it all up our own. Third reason that self is easy is after conversion, we overvalue our own righteousness. We still undervalue Christ and overvalue ourselves. Paul says, I count all things as loss. I count all things as loss. Yet we tend to say, well, you know, I'm a Christian, I serve, and I do better, and I'm not, right? Everything I've done is loss. Mr. Fox was known to say that he was more afraid of his grace than he was of his sins. Fox, who wrote Fox's Book of Martyrs, he said, I'm more afraid of my graces than are my sins. As being a danger, my graces are a danger of me being puffed up, lest it should tempt me to put confidence in myself. Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 4. I am conscious of nothing against myself. When I examine myself, I don't necessarily see things. I'm conscious of nothing against it. Yet, he says, yet I am not acquitted by my consciousness against myself. The one who examines me is the Lord. Right? When I look at my own life, I may cut myself some slack. I may not see everything. I may have glossed over it. I may have spackled or plastered my life too much. And what I am mindful of is God sees it all. And he sees it through a holy eyes and not with veiled eyes. Now, I'm not sitting here telling everybody to go home and just really, be depressed and you're horrible and see all this. I'm not trying to bring you down. Merry Christmas. Okay? But I am trying to see you what amazing gift Christ is to us. And I want you to do all you can and still rely on the grace of God. Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 22 says, Now I command the Levites that they should purify themselves and come as the gatekeepers to sanctify the Sabbath day. For this also remember me, O my God, and I have compassion on me according to the greatness of thy loving kindness. Nehemiah says, I'm doing everything I can. I'm trying to do it all right. I've got Ezra reading the law to me. I'm trying to follow every bit of the law. I've got the Levites coming. I'm having them purify themselves. We're going to sanctify the Sabbath day. And I'm asking you simply to remember me. And even though I'm trying to do everything right, I also recognize that I am completely dependent on the compassion and greatness of the loving kindness of God. I'm doing everything I know to do right. Paul, my conscience has nothing against me, yet I know I need the grace of God. That's why self must be rejected. First and foremost, self must be rejected before God. A carnal self in opposition to God is known in carnal self opposition to the good of others. If my carnal self is ultimately in opposition to God, then my carnal self also, even though I may do all the right things publicly, is against others. How can I love God whom I'm not seeing if I can't love those that I see? How can I deny self to God whom I do not see if I do not deny self to those I do see? Pure love, service, care for others, right? Impurity is critical and expectations and entitlements and I do better than they do and my heart's in a better place than theirs, all those things. Self-love is rejected in Scripture. That's the one thing we're good at. We have two commands, and two of those commands have nothing to do with self-love. Love God and love others as yourself. Well, first of all, in loving others, we demonstrate God's love. In loving others, we demonstrate God's love. God needs nothing from us. You know that, right? God needs nothing from us. And yet He joys in loving us in such a way that we glorify and love Him. Therefore, God need not our love. And so His love is therefore a service to us. We demonstrate our love to God, who desires our love, yet not needing that love. He desires our love, yet He doesn't need it. And we demonstrate that love to God when we love other people. 1 John so famously writes about love over and over again. In chapter 4, verse 20, it says, if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. 1 John 3:17, but whoever has the world's goods and beholds his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? You see somebody who has a need and you do not help them with that need, right? Galatians 5 says, the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in one statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law is just bound up in that one. Should not our striving be in that one direction? John 15, Jesus says, this I command you, that you love one another. 1 John 3:24, the one who keeps his commandments abide in him and he in him. And we know this, that he abides in us. How do we know that? The Spirit he has given us and that we love. Jesus walks into an upper room. They're fighting about who's the greatest. He washes their feet. Then he predicts not only will he be betrayed by one of them, to which that one leaves, and then he says, y'all are going to leave me, and one's going to betray me, and he argues with Peter about that betrayal. And after he says all that, right, all this is going on in the upper room. Not just, the upper room was this wonderful place. They're arguing about who's the greatest. They're talking about betrayal and denial. John 13:34, and he says after all that, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. That you don't argue about who's the greatest, but that you love one another even as I have loved you. How do I love you? Well, I washed your feet. That you also love one another. This means that I love my neighbor. I would no more hurt my neighbor than I would hurt myself. Have you ever been a part of neighborhood drama? This neighbor hates that neighbor, and this neighbor mows his yard sideways, and this one has cats that won't, this neighborhood drama. You ever been a part of neighborhood drama? You would no more hurt them than you would hurt yourself. You would promote their good as much as you would promote your own. The standard to regulate my self-love and my love for my neighbor is my love for self. We just do. We just do. It reduces my out-of-control love for other, and it raises my underachieving love. It reduces my out-of-control love for self, and it raises my underachieving love for others. So in other words, I love myself, and so it reduces my prideful love for self, but it raises my underachieving love for other people, so that love of self and love for others is at least on par, at a minimum on par. And honor, preferring one another, would be the fact that we're not quite in balance. In fact, we love them more than we love ourselves. Go back to John 13:34, right? A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Even as I have loved you, also love one another. So now the standard is not just how much I love myself. The standard is how much Christ loved me. Well, what did he do? Well, he didn't just turn water into wine so you could have a better party. He died on the cross for your sins. All that to say this, those who miss Christmas like Herod, from a mild disappointment to a flaming fire of fury, of hurt feelings and lashing out, comes from a love of self. They are self-loving and self-seeking. That's hard to say. Just because you were disappointed, well, my disappointment is to the measure of which I love myself too much. If you spend the balance of tomorrow from 7 a.m. to 2 in the afternoon getting dinner ready so that it can be gone in 45 minutes, leaving nothing but a pile of dishes, and then you clean those dishes till 5 in the afternoon and finally sit down at the end of the day. Now, obviously, I'm talking to the women because none of you guys are going to do that, right? And are disappointed. What good was it? When you love, you don't care about the public benefit. When you love, you don't care about the public benefit. You only want their private lives to flourish, and you have an interest in their flourishing. Now, mothers, and they're just this unique, amazing. God wired them so awesome. They serve and love, and they serve and love, and they get the greatest fulfillment out of serving. And I don't know if dads are that way. I know I'm necessarily not. Right? Thinking this morning just about, Christmas and special and all the love that goes into that and all that kind of stuff. And I thought to myself this morning, I have never had Christmas hinge on me. I've always had a mom do that or a wife do that. I am 100% show up, move some chairs Christmas guy. I don't decorate. Actually, never been asked. I've been asked to hang some lights outside from time to time. A little grinchy about it. I was asked for a budget from time to time, from year to year, about what we can spend on Christmas, which I don't know why she asked, because we never kept it. But other than that, Christmas has been largely show up for me. And yet Christmas has always been incredibly special. A wonderful time. And that's the amazing reality. In Judges chapter 5, Judges is this underrated book, I believe, much like Leviticus, but I understand the underrating of Leviticus sometimes. In Judges chapter 5, there's this tribe. And it says, "Curse them arose," said the angel of the Lord. "Utterly curse the inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, to help of the Lord against the warriors." They watched their neighbors get raided by the warriors, and they sat there and did nothing. They did not help. It's basically the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan. The guy's beat, left bloody on the side of the road, and these guys are just walking by. And here's this tribe, and they watched their neighbors getting raided by the warriors, and they didn't blow a horn. They didn't grab a sword. They didn't yell, "Hey, stop it." Nothing. They didn't lift it. They did nothing. They were just worried about, don't raid us, keep us, we're staying out of this, we're staying out of the fray here, we're not doing that. The angel of the Lord says, you're cursed for not helping your neighbor. So much for isolationism. Like most of us, the narrow private heart, they do not seek the welfare of others. I know if I'm not helping the welfare of others, I am not loving. And if I'm not loving, I'm inevitably going to miss Christmas. Some love self so much that they keep their world small so they can manage their own accomplishments and their own exposures. Never grow, never learn, never listen, right? Kind of like the man with the talents, he just went and buried them. Just keep them. I don't want to. Oh, they're polite, yes, but they're private. Self, for sure, for the believer is to be swallowed up by the great self-Lord. Romans 12 says we are many members in a body, one body, and members do not have the same function. So we who are many are the one body, individual members of another. We are individual members of another. I'm an individual member of you, and you're an individual member of me. One body, one bride of Christ, a member of the great self, the body of Christ. Jealousy and fury and self-centered heart would keep all the gifts to themselves, would have all good proceeds to them first and give nothing to others, not return to them. What's the answer? The answer is to follow Christ in Romans 15. Now we who are strong ought to bear the weakness of those who are without strength and not just please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his own good, to his edification. For even Christ did not please himself, but as is written, the reproaches of those who reproach thee fell upon me. I have a good friend I've known since high school, and we did church together for a little over 20 years in Kansas. And he's a great businessman, loves the Lord, extremely generous. He's a builder. Has a company that builds, and commercially primarily, and does a lot of that. And he just was a great servant in the church. And he actually helped, his company built our church. So I knew the building inside and out. And whenever it snowed in Kansas, it snows that white stuff. Anyway, whenever it snowed in Kansas, he would be the guy who got up at 3:30 in the morning and went out at 4 o'clock to the parking lot, and he would clean the parking lot off so that we could have church. And he would do that before we would ever make the phone call, we're going to have church or not. So whether or not we had church or not, the parking lot was clean. And I told him something, you don't have to do all this. He said, well, one, I want to for the Lord. And two, I have all these amazing construction toys, and I never get to play with them. So he'd get out there with his skid steers, and he'd clean the parking lot off. And many times things would happen in church, and, he'd get the phone call, and he'd be there. And I'd show up on Saturdays often, and he'd be there working, doing something. And we were talking one time. He said, I really have to fight my heart. I said, why is that? He said, I'm here. I work incredible hours. I work on bids till midnight or 2. I miss my family and all that. And then what do I do on Saturday? I come here and I do these things for the church, and nobody shows up, and I'm the only one here, and I'm the only guy working and doing this. And he said, it's a fight. And I said, I'm sorry. Yeah, he said, don't be sorry. It's my heart and it's my problem. Because a lot of times, like, why isn't anybody else here? I'd love to be with my family on Saturday. Where's everybody else? He said, I have to realize I'm doing this for the Lord, and I'm not doing this for recognition. And they're going to show up, and they're not going to realize what was done, and they won't even appreciate it because they didn't even know it. And I'm not going to have nobody comes and says, thanks for giving up your Saturday. I run to Home Depot, I buy all this equipment, I do all these things, and I have to work that through. I have to spiritually sit down and say, stop complaining. And stop worrying about what other people aren't here helping me. I have to really work through that process. And he says, sometimes I win in that process, and sometimes I lose. Man, that's so true, isn't it? That's the struggle I think each one of us go through. Yeah, we want to not be caught up in self, but self is just loud, right? As much as I try to turn self off, self is loud, and it's easy to begin to compare. I've been there, I've done that. I have served in this ministry for 10 years, and nobody else, I'm always there, and I'm doing, and right? I'm here helping this person in need, and where's the rest of the people in church? I wish they loved as much as I love. Oh, I guess self just kind of came out. We all do that. We all do that because of self. As soon as I start counting how much other people love, as soon as I count how much other people give, as soon as I start counting all those things, then I begin to be a little bit of Herod and not enough of Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him, right? What an incredible thing. Romans 15, now we who are strong ought to bear witness of the weakness of those who are without strength and not just please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good. I'm pleasing my neighbor not for my good, for his good, and I'm doing it for his edification. For even Christ did not please himself, but as is written, the reproach of those who reproach you fell upon me. Some of the people in the crowd that were crying crucified 40 to 50 days later at Pentecost cried, save me. And while they were reproaching Christ, ultimately needed Christ. And they, by God's grace, came to understand that. He bore that. He did not say, salvation's for everybody who was not a part of the crowd that wanted to kill me. You guys crossed the line. No, he saved them. Right? I don't know if we'll see the centurion in heaven. Kind of think we will. He said, surely this must be the Son of God. This guy ordered him to be nailed to the cross, and he didn't, right? Well, I can't judge that guy because my sins were on the cross as much as anybody else's. The more we die to self, the more we live the message of Christmas. We love, we give, we empty ourselves, who though in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, humbled himself, came. It's the incarnation. I often wonder, I was kind of reading through Genesis chapter 3 this last week and just kind of thinking about it, meditating on it. And obviously, you know, this isn't the scope of God knows everything, God's timeless and stuff like that. So the thought process of God is completely different than what my thought process is about the thought process of God, right? His ways are higher. But, so God comes and says to Adam and Eve, they're walking in the garden, really the pre-incarnate Christ, walking in the garden, and he curses the serpent, and he lays the curse upon Eve, lays the curse upon man, right? They're going to work. And he lays that out, and he says to Eve, right, your seed is going to crush the serpent on the head, and he's going to bruise your heel. From that point to the cross, I just wondered, you know, okay, was Jesus in anticipation that, okay, I got to go down there and do this? Or was he anxious to get it done? Man, how much longer do I have to wait till I can become incarnate and go save these people? That's kind of the feeling I have, because that's the love of God, right? He's up there just going, man, it's only 1500 BC. I got so much longer to wait. I just want to save these people now. Can I go now? Again, he's not thinking, but you know, there's this excitement that we have that God, I'm giving you my son, yeah. Not okay, you get sorry, sinning, self-loving people. I gotta give you my son. Love doesn't act like that. Mercy doesn't act like that. Well, you got me a present for Christmas. Kind of feel like I got to get you one too. Trying to find a way to get rid of ourselves. And Christmas is this great reminder that maybe what I need to do this afternoon or next week or so is just sit down and say, Lord, I got this much self. Help me have this much self. And then maybe in a few months I can have this much self. And just start losing it. And the way I learn how to lose myself is to love Christ. Love Christ. God gave you a gift this Christmas. Man, love it. Just love it, okay? Father, we thank you. The only way to have a Merry Christmas and a great life is to love you and learn love from you. Well, I pray, Father, that we'll enjoy our Christmas. In the meantime, Father, continue striving and growing in our faith and relationship to you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.